The rain had not yet reached the shores of Tsushima, but the wind carried a forewarning, one so sharp and cold that even the samurai standing guard along the coastal cliffs felt the sting of it. On that morning, long before the sun rose, long before anyone on the island could imagine the scale of destruction approaching them, a single fisherman stumbled ashore, his voice broken by terror. He pointed toward the horizon, trembling, unable to form words. It didn't matter. The samurai saw it too. A black line, a vast shadow, a forest of masts stretching across the sea like an iron wall. The Mongols had come, and with them, the storm. Every instinct told the samurai commanders that this was not a raid. It was something far greater. Something meant to erase. Whispers traveled along the ranks, 300 ships, perhaps 400, each loaded with warriors, archers, fire tenders, siege engineers. Tsushima, small and isolated, was a stepping stone. One the Mongols intended to crush under their boots. At the center of the gathering samurai stood Lord Sukekuni, a man hardened by years of defending these shores, yet even he felt the grip of dread. But fear was an emotion he buried deep. Instead, he tightened his gauntlets and looked across the faces of his men, farmers' sons, younger brothers, seasoned retainers, and even boys who had insisted on carrying spears though their hands still shook. For all of them, he forced his voice to remain steady. "The sea has chosen us," he said. "And if the Mongols stand upon this island, they will find only our bodies are their own." But for all his resolve, Sukekuni had heard the stories, whispers drifting across Korea of the Mongols' brutality. They did not duel. They did not honor. They killed swiftly and without hesitation. They delighted in breaking the spirit before breaking the body. The samurai way clashed violently with that philosophy. Yet, Tsushima had no choice. It had always been a shield for the mainland. Its people were the first to bleed so that others might survive. When dawn finally bled over the water, it revealed a nightmare. Thousands of armored men stood on Mongol decks, rows of archers with composite bows already drawn. The samurai watched in tense silence, breaths freezing in their lungs. Then the Mongols unleashed hell. Arrows, hundreds at once, darkened the sky. They were not the elegant, single-arrow challenges that samurai were accustomed to. These were volleys meant to erase entire lines of defenders. Men fell before they even realized they were dead. Horses screamed. Shields splintered. Yet the samurai held formation, raising their own bows in reply. Their arrows arced beautifully, striking the wooden hulls and piercing leather armor. Some Mongols dropped, but compared to the constant raining fury from the ships, it was a droplet in the storm. Sukekuni saw that the enemy would not stop firing. They were softening the beach for the landing. The true slaughter had not even begun. He gritted his teeth and roared the only order that made sense: charge. The samurai surged forward on horseback and on foot, racing toward the shoreline. They knew the Mongols excelled in open fields, but here, on the sand, they hoped the tide and terrain might favor them. They expected the Mongols to hesitate, to wait for the volleys to thin their numbers more. But the Mongols did not hesitate. They welcomed the charge. The landing crafts hit the beach simultaneously, dropping their ramps. Mongol soldiers stormed out with shields interlocked. They moved not as individuals but as a single, armored creature, fluid, disciplined, deadly. The first samurai to reach them swung his blade in a sweeping arc, expecting to cut through a man. Instead, 3 spears thrust outward at once. They pierced his armor, lifting him off his feet before throwing him aside like a broken doll. More samurai crashed into the shield wall. Cries of rage collided with the Mongols, chilling silence. Steel rang. Arrows hissed past helmets. The smell of blood mixed with the salt of the sea. The Mongols fought with terrifying efficiency. While a samurai would pause to challenge a worthy opponent, seeking an honorable duel, Mongol warriors struck relentlessly at any exposed target. They attacked from angles no samurai had trained to defend. 2 spears pinning a blade, a sword slicing the legs, a knife finishing the throat. There was no rhythm, only overwhelming brutality. And then came the fire. Torches were hurled from the ships, clinging to the sand, to banners, to the bodies of the fallen. Mongol fire tenders released small clay pots that exploded into flaming oil, splashing across men and horses alike. Screams ripped through the beach as samurai burned alive, rolling desperately in the sand with no hope of extinguishing the inferno. Despite everything, Sukekuni fought with a ferocity that stunned those around him. His blade cut through 3 Mongols in one sweep. He kicked a spearman backward, parried 2 more strikes, then thrust his sword up through the chin of a 4th attacker. Blood sprayed his armor, but he didn't slow. Yet every time he cut one down, 2 more appeared. It was like trying to carve a hole in the tide. Near him, his younger brother Taira fell to his knees, a spear through his stomach. Sukakuni caught him, dragging him toward a fallen banner for cover. Taira coughed blood and managed a weak smile. "Brother, it seems the gods are not on our side today." "They are," Sukakuni insisted, though his voice cracked. "Their judgment is simply heavier." But he knew the truth. The Mongols were not an army. They were a storm, a force of nature, and Tsushima was too small to weather it. The samurai's last line formed near the tree line, desperate to keep the Mongols contained on the beach. If the enemy reached the villages beyond, the slaughter would be unimaginable. Sukakuni rallied the survivors, faces streaked with blood, soot, tears, yet still they came. His voice rose above the chaos. "We stand here. If we fall, our families follow." The samurai screamed as one, and for a moment, the Mongols slowed, perhaps surprised by the sheer stubbornness of an army they expected to crumble. The clash that followed was the fiercest yet. Blades shattered, horses trampled the wounded, men grappled in the sand, stabbing wildly with daggers and broken arrows. The tide soaked the bodies in red foam. By midday, the beach was unrecognizable. What had once been a quiet stretch of sand was now a graveyard filled with smoke, corpses, and the mangled remains of those who had stood their ground. The Mongols, still numbering in the thousands, pressed inland. Sukakuni's forces had dwindled to a few dozen. Exhausted, bleeding, yet still unbroken, they retreated into a dense forest path where the trees offered narrow passage. Here, the Mongols could not surround them so easily. Here, the samurai could make their stand. Or so they hoped. But the Mongols brought with them dogs, massive, armored beasts trained for war. When released, they tore through the thicket with savage efficiency, dragging samurai down by their limbs and throats. The forest became another field of agony as screams echoed through the branches. Sukakuni fought until he could no longer lift his blade. 3 arrows protruded from his shoulder, and his left leg barely supported him. Yet he still stood over the bodies of his fallen brothers, daring the enemy to step closer. A Mongol officer approached him with a calm expression, as though observing a curious artifact. He gave Sukakuni a chance to surrender, a gesture of rare mercy. But the samurai spat blood and lifted his sword with trembling hands. The officer nodded once, almost respectfully, before signaling his men. The end came fast, but Sukakuni did not fall silently. His last cry thundered through the forest, reaching the ears of the last surviving villagers fleeing deeper inland. Tsushima had lost, but its spirit had not died. It was only the beginning. The smoke that rose over Tsushima that night could be seen from miles away. Villagers who had hidden in caves, ravines, and mountain passes peered anxiously toward the glowing horizon. The Mongols had taken the beach. They had killed the warriors. Now they would come for everything else. Deep within a mountain forest, a small group of survivors huddled together around the dim light of a concealed fire. Among them were a handful of injured samurai, several farmers, 3 children, and Lady Hana, widow of Lord Sukakuni's cousin. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but her spirit remained unbroken. She held a short blade in her lap, determined to defend the children if the need arose. Beside her sat Jiro, a young samurai who had escaped the final clash only by being knocked unconscious and mistaken for dead. His face bore the cuts of battle, and his armor was cracked in several places, yet he forced himself upright. "We can't stay hidden," Jiro whispered. "The Mongols will sweep the island. They'll burn everything they touch. If we stay here, they'll trap us like animals." "But where can we go?" one farmer asked. "The sea behind us, the Mongols ahead, this island has no shelter left." Jiro considered the map in his mind. "North, to the cliffs. There's an old shrine there. Difficult to reach. If we can hold out a day or two, perhaps help will come from the mainland." "But what if no help comes?" Hana asked quietly. Jiro hesitated. He had no answer. But he could not allow fear to rule them. Not after everything the samurai had sacrificed. "Then we die as Tsushima's last defenders," he said. "But we do not die tonight." Their journey north was slow and treacherous. They moved through overgrown paths, avoiding open clearings where Mongols might spot them. Several times they heard enemy voices nearby, Commands barked in harsh Mongolian, footsteps trampling through the brush, horses snorting. Each time, they froze, clutching children close until the danger passed. But danger did not always pass. At midday, they reached a desolate village. Residual smoke curled from collapsed rooftops. Chickens pecked aimlessly at ashes. And everywhere lay bodies, villagers who had not escaped in time. Jiro's hands trembled as he walked through the wreckage. He had seen battlefields, but what the Mongols did here was something else entirely. Heads had been severed and placed upon stakes. Women lay with their hands bound. Even the animals had been slaughtered. Lady Hannah pressed a cloth to her mouth to stifle her sob. "Are they doing this everywhere?" "Yes," Jiro said softly. "They want to break us. All of Japan, not just Tsushima. And can they?" An older farmer whispered. Jiro looked toward the sea, imagining the vast fleet. "If we lose our resolve, yes." The group moved on quickly, but the weight of the scene lingered. As the sun began to fall, they reached a river crossing. The survivors waded carefully through the icy water. The children shivered, and Hannah carried the smallest on her back. Just as they reached the opposite bank, Jiro halted suddenly. A Mongol scout stood among the reeds, watching them. For a moment, neither side moved. Then the scout raised his horn. Jiro acted before he could blow it. He sprinted forward, sword flashing, and slashed the horn aside. The scout roared, swinging his curved blade. The two clashed violently, water splashing around them. Jiro's exhaustion slowed him, but desperation gave him strength. He parried, struck, twisted their blades apart, and drove his sword into the scout's chest. The body fell into the water. Jiro collapsed to his knees, panting. "We must run. They heard us. They're close." The survivors fled along the riverbank, hearts pounding. Mongol voices erupted behind them. Arrows hissed through the air, thudding into trees. A child screamed as an arrow grazed his shoulder. Hannah scooped him into her arms and kept running. The chase lasted through the dusk. The survivors scrambled up rocky hills, forced their way through thorny undergrowth, and pushed their bodies far beyond their limits. Finally, as night wrapped the island in darkness, they reached the cliffside steps leading to the old shrine. Half-collapsed stone stairs spiraled upward, illuminated only by moonlight. Jiro urged everyone up. "Go. The high ground is our only safety." They climbed, stumbling, gasping, crying, but climbing nonetheless. Only once everyone reached the top did Jiro allow himself to collapse beside the shrine gate. He listened carefully. The Mongols had reached the base of the cliff. Their torches flickered below like glowing insects. But they did not climb. For now, they hesitated. Perhaps they feared an ambush in the dark. Perhaps the terrain was too unfamiliar. It didn't matter. They had bought a few hours of life. Inside the ruined shrine, the survivors gathered. There were no doors, only broken columns and wind-worn statues. But it was shelter. They lit a small fire, careful to block its glow with fallen beams. Hannah tended to the wounded child, whispering soothing words in his ear. Jiro washed the blood from his blade, staring at the steel. He thought of Sukakuni. He thought of the samurai whose bodies lay scattered across the beach. He thought of Tsushima burning around him. Hannah moved beside him quietly. "You're blaming yourself," she said. "It was my duty to die with my commander. It was your duty to survive for us," she said firmly. "The children need you. I need you." Her voice shook, but her resolve did not. Jiro met her gaze. Something unspoken passed between them, fear, loss, hope, all tangled together. Before he could reply, a distant sound echoed up the cliff. Drums. Mongol war drums. The survivors froze. Below them, torchlight multiplied. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. "They're coming," Jiro whispered. The Mongols had chosen to ascend under darkness after all. Jiro rose to his feet. He could no longer feel his exhaustion. Only purpose. He looked at the handful of surviving samurai, men barely able to stand, yet willing to fight. "Tonight," he said, "we hold this shrine as if it were Japan itself." And with no hesitation, they formed a defensive ring around the entrance. The Mongols began to climb. Their torches bobbed like fiery serpents moving up the cliff face. Jiro gripped his sword tightly. Behind him, Hannah herded the children deeper into the shrine's shadows. Minutes later, the first Mongol reached the top, and Jiro struck instantly. The man tumbled back, taking 2 climbers with him. But more came. 10, 20, 30. The cliff became a stream of enemy soldiers. Their war cries tore through the night as they surged toward the shrine. The samurai braced themselves. Steel met steel. Arrows scraped stone. The shrine's sacred statues crumbled under the weight of bodies. Jiro fought at the front, refusing to give an inch. He slashed, blocked, thrust, pivoted. A spear grazed his ribs, another cut his arm. He ignored both. A Mongol axeman struck from behind, but Jiro spun, catching the blade on his guard before driving his sword upward through the man's jaw. Still they came. A samurai to Jiro's left fell with a broken spear lodged in his throat. Another was seized and thrown off the cliff. The circle tightened. The Mongols pushed harder. Jiro felt his strength failing. His vision blurred. His breath came ragged. Yet he still fought. Suddenly, he heard Hana scream. He whipped around, and in that instant, a Mongol blade plunged into his side. Pain exploded through him. He staggered but did not fall. He grabbed the attacker's wrist, twisted, broke it, then rammed his sword through the man's chest. But the wound was mortal. He fell to his knees, blood pooling beneath him. Hana rushed forward, dragging the children behind her. Jiro, no, stay with me. He tried to speak, but blood filled his throat. He looked into her eyes, and even through the pain, he managed a faint smile. You must survive, he forced out. For Tsushima's future, for all of Japan. The Mongols pressed closer. Hana lifted Jiro's sword in trembling hands. She stood over him, her eyes blazing with the fury of a woman who had lost everything except her final promise. She would protect the children, even if it cost her life. Then, an explosion shook the cliffs. A deep boom rolled across the island, followed by shouts not in Mongolian but Japanese. Torches appeared along the distant ridge. Reinforcements. A small fleet from Hakata Bay had arrived at last. The Mongols hesitated, and that hesitation saved the survivors. The reinforcements charged down the ridge, slamming into the Mongol rear. The enemy, caught between two forces, began to retreat down the cliff. Chaos erupted below as their formation crumbled. Hana dropped to her knees beside Jiro. Help is here, she whispered desperately. You will live. But Jiro shook his head, blood staining his lips. My life ends here. But yours must continue. His eyes slowly closed, the final breath leaving his body like a fading ember. Hana sobbed silently. Tsushima had been shattered, burned, and blood-soaked. But amid the ruins, a spark of survival remained. And that spark would ignite a nation. Japan would remember Tsushima, not only for its defeat, but for its defiance. A defiance that would one day stop the Mongols forever.